Hi everybody. So we're gonna look at some of the themes of Makat Shechin, the sixth plague. As we mentioned today, in the first symbol, we have the theme of the embarrassment and the psychological kind of torture of the Egyptian people, where you have the Khartoumim, the magicians, aren't able to stand before Moshe, and we looked at the Midrash and the punishment of Paro for trying to steal Sarah's wife, that this was some form of disease which prevented a person from having normal family life, from being together with one spouse, and the Egyptians here were being punished midah keneged midah, that they tried to break apart the marriages of the Jewish families, and they were punished with not being able to have normal family life because the Shechin affected them in such a painful and debilitating kind of way that it broke apart normal family life. Second point, an outcome of Makat Shechin is really the actual physical part of the punishment. In other words, in Dvarim, the book of Dvarim, there's a passage called the Tochacha. It's a very dark prophecy about what will happen in the future when the Jewish people don't keep the Torah and mitzvot of Hashem. And it says there that one of the punishments will be a Shechin, this disease that we've said is it's a disease that attacks the body, the skin, and it impacts the birkaim and the shokaim, which are basically your knees, your lower body. You're not able to stand. So this is a reflection on what we saw in the Psukim, that the Khartoumim were literally unable to stand. They were literally unable to function and stand before Moshe. The Midrash here in the middle speaks about the horror, the pain, the actual physiological kind of impact of this plague of Shechin, that it was such kadesh lo yuchlu ligabe gufan. They couldn't even feel their own body. It was covered with so much of this disease all over it. They weren't comfortable in their own skin. In another comment in the Midrash, it says that it was like a form of tzara'at. It was these spots and these kind of things that were popping up all over the body. A very, very, very intense, horrific kind of physiological reaction to this plague. And again, in the book of Eo, which is a story about a man who had everything in the world. He had a beautiful family, a wife and children, and a home, and lots of money, and everything he wanted. This is a book at the end, actually in the section of Tanakh called Ketuvim, and the book of Eov. God basically is very proud of this man named Eov, who has everything, and the Satan, comes to God and says to him, "Why don't we give this guy a challenge, and we'll see if he still is a loyal servant of Hashem." And this is just one part of the whole story, where he basically, everything gets taken away from him: his children, his wife, his house, his stuff, his belongings, his animals, his wealth, his riches. Everything gets taken away, and he doesn't question, he doesn't get upset at God. He just takes it as it is. And here in the second Perek, it says that after everything had been done, that all is said and done, everything was taken away from him. All of his wealth, all of his riches, his family was basically wiped out. What was the last thing that affected him? Was a Shechin, right? It was a Shechin Ra. It was a terrible disease, epidermal disease, that impacted and afflicted his body from his legs, which we said before, that's where the Shechin really strikes at, and all the way up to his kodkodo, which is his head, his skull. So we see that that Eov, was very impacted by the Shechin, and we see that this plague is really a very the second point here is that the plague it's a heavy punishment. It's a very heavy impact, a physical impact. Egyptians are going to feel this. They're going to really, really, really be impacted very, very harshly. The third point is that something that's interesting about the plague of Shechin. There are many, many, many different miracles about the plague of Shechin. If you look at one of the lines here in this midrash, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi teaches, Nes Gadol Nasa b'Shechin, a great miracle happened with the Shechin. Shadam Zorei Chetz Lamala. Usually, if a person shoots an arrow up to the sky, it only goes a certain distance. Moshe Zarak Piach Yushan, he throws up this dirt, ash up to the sky, a handful, and it's like, what is it? It's dirt. How does that even travel? And Moshe was able to throw it up all the way to the Shemayim. But that's not the part I wanted to focus on. Look at the next line. The dirt turned into a disease. How does that happen? That's a real miraculous point here. Like we said in class, it was really like black magic, which we'll get back to in a second. So what's interesting is that these ashes are very clear. They're empirical. There's something that you can see. There's something you can touch. There's something you can feel. And there's going to be an after effect. What's the after effect? Moshe specifically took ashes that people, have that stoke the fire in their stove. And what did he use that for? He used that to turn that into the attack, the disease that attacked the Egyptians. So you could imagine the next time an Egyptian, after the plague was over, the next time an Egyptian went to his stove to turn it up, to light the fire, he probably was thinking twice, oh no, if I use this ash, if I use this dirt, maybe it's going to turn into something that could attack me. The same way we've looked at in the concept of the gods of the Egyptians turning on them, the animals that they worshipped, and the crocodile and the Nile River itself, right? There's the nature is in a sense turning on the Egyptians here. So it's not just that the plague had an impact when the plague was going on, but when the plague was even finished, this was a great impact that was felt even after the fact. And the last point on the Makkah of Shechin is this emphasis that we see in the Psukim, and here I've just generated all of the Psukim that describe this Makkah, Pasuk Chet, all the way through Pasuk Yud Bet, and we like to look for things that repeat themselves in the Psukim. So in the previous Makkah, Makkah Dever, we saw the concept that the Jewish people's cattle didn't die during that plague, and that was repeated 3 times in a span of 7 psukim. So here we have the fact that Moshe is playing a very important role in how he kind of orchestrates and carries out the plague of Shechin. Pasuk Chet, Uzrako Moshe Shemaima, Pasuk Yud, Vayizroko to Moshe Shemaim, he throws it up to the sky. The Chartumim couldn't stand before Moshe, right? Leiv Paro was hardened, and he didn't listen to them, that which Hashem said to Moshe. So the emphasis here on Moshe is like the celebrity. He's like the star of the show in this Makkah, more than any other plague that we've seen before. 4 times in the short span of a few psukim. And really, this is really coming to highlight the fact that Moshe's role is not just to bring the makot, it's not just to be the person who brought the punishment on the Egyptians, but to gain fame, to gain popularity in a sense, and to outduel the magicians at their own game. As I just said a few moments ago, this was a real plague of black magic. Moshe took a handful of dirt, he threw it up to the sky, and it turned into boils and pus and zits all over people's bodies and disease. So this is very magical. And Moshe's going, okay, you guys want a magic showdown? And I can beat you at your own game, in a sense. So Moshe is using the term that we've used before, shifting the balance of power, showing that Moshe is on top, The Khartoumim are basically irrelevant. They have no longer any power. So these are the 4 points. To summarize, the 4 points of Shechin, of the Makkah of Shechin. The first one is to embarrass, psychologically torture and embarrass, and kind of disrupt the daily family life of the Egyptians. Point number 2 was to bring a heavy punishment, a painful, physiological, heavy punishment on the Egyptians. Point number 3 was the idea that even when the plague was finished, the impact of the plague was still felt in the afterward, that people were scared to light their stoves again. And finally, the emphasis here on Moshe's role as an emerging, very, very important person in this whole story, not just as the person who brings the Makot, but as the shifting balance of power. Moshe is becoming more and more revered, more and more feared, and more important in the eyes not just of the Jewish people, but in the eyes of the Egyptians and Paro as well. And now you will take the rest of the time to focus on the last plague of the chapter, the plague of Barad.